Welcome to the Lost Signals Discusses Literature,
where we apply the revolutionary Mott scale
to classic and contemporary works of prose.
So, join us once again, won't you?
Hello, and welcome back to the Lost Signals Discusses Literature. Today we are talking about a short story by one of the big hitters in science fiction, Arthur C. Clarke. It is the short story from 1953, The 9 Billion Names of God. I am going to be your host, Steve Ramosi, joined today by Christopher Morgan.
My God only has 3 names.
Jonathan Ian Manzer.
I did the calculations. It's actually a Google of gods.
And Scott Thurlow.
And God does not have a name because there is no God.
And Scott, do you have a log line for us?
I mean, sort of. So, yes, would the last person left alive please shut out the lights in the universe?
Not bad, not bad. And you're on plot as well, so just keep talking.
Yeah. So, this is a very short story, and to be fair, this is my pick in full disclosure. So, I've read this story a couple of times, like half a dozen times maybe at this point for this episode, and it's a rather well-known Arthur C. Clarke classic, I believe, from multiple anthologies of his. So basically, it's two contractors are contracted by a sort of a remote Tibetan monastery, or just a monastery in Tibet. They say the Master Lama or whatever, so it's implied to be that. And their job is to provide a sort of supercomputer that can run a lot of calculations. The monastery's goal is to run out. They've been doing this for centuries by hand. Run out all the possible combinations, names of God. And they believe that when they have completed this, then humanity's job in the universe will be complete and the universe will shut down. And the two contractor guys are kind of amusingly aloof about it. Like, yeah, we're going here. And then they start talking like, oh, shit, what happens when, in their mind, like, oh, they're going to run out all the names. Like, the computer will be done in X days. And when it doesn't do anything, the monks will be pissed at us. So let's sort of sneak out on the sly. And then that way they won't get mad when it doesn't happen. So they do that, and as they're coming down the mountain from the monastery, they look up in the sky, and this is a very famous last line, one by one, all the stars were going out. And which implies, of course, that the monks completed their mission. They found all the 9 billion names of God, and the universe is shutting down. And that's it. Yeah, so it's a very brief story. Like I said, it's even shorter than the one we just did recently the other week. So I still think it holds up solidly enough. I probably won't give it enough credit for a 3, but I think it deserves a solid, decent 2 on that front. It again goes by quick. There's not a lot of depth to it, which might come out in other questions. But just for the narrative itself, I think it's perfectly fine. Like I said, it's Arthur C. Clarke, so his writing is usually generally very good or quite solid enough. So that's what I'm looking at. What do you guys think?
I agree with you. I think it is. I hate this term, but it is what it is. It's a
thought experiment.
It's no fault of the story. It's just narratively, by our scales, it warrants a 2. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's quality. It's just
it's a neat idea that could have been fleshed out, but it's felt like it almost has always felt to me like Clarke was like, it's a cool little thing. I'm just gonna write a little quick thing about it and move on and write that bunch of other stories.
See, the problem is any fleshing out of the story, it would fall apart.
Yeah,
because it would have to start explaining things.
Yeah, so maybe
it can't. Any answers it tried to give would just make 1,000 more questions. So it ended exactly when it needed to not fall down this ridiculous rabbit hole. Because I started asking questions. I'm like, you would start just putting holes in the philosophy of this, and it just granted, yes, if we get all the names of God, he's going to end humanity. Reminds me of a George Carlin thing, like perhaps nature only created us to make plastic, because it can't make it on its own, and thus we did it. Time for us to leave.
The Earth wants us all to leave, of course.
But that actually has narrative weight to our existence. Naming God doesn't. I don't know. I didn't particularly enjoy this, but sure.
It's not your cup of tea, you're saying, I guess, for the most part?
It's a 2.
Yeah, in terms of plot, I think it's a 2. It like you're right. This feels like a story that Clarke like woke up from a dream one day and was like, "Oh, that was a crazy dream. Just people finding all the names of God. Let me write it into a story before I go back to sleep tonight."
I'll bang it out and then I'm done. Whatever later.
And then he did, and then he went back to sleep. But like there is certainly a lot to question about like what's going on in this thing. But in terms of like how the story was written, in terms of the plot, I thought it was fine for a short story, pretty low 2, and or maybe a mid 2, and I think that's good. Yeah.
Yep. Word.
So that's gonna be 2s all around for that, and we're gonna go to Chris with the themes.
Scientifically, Ian actually, when he was discussing, I was going to steal Ian's idea for antagonists because it seemed to kind of probably go hand in hand. It's just basically trying to compute the existence of God. It's kind of like you're throwing was it 9 billion things against the wall to see what's going to stick. It's basically, yeah, it's basically you're trying to prove God's existence in, I don't know, maybe the monks had this wrong. Maybe God just got bored. He got 40 names into it and said, "Oh, you got 9 billion. Fuck this shit. I'm ending the universe. Good night." So thematically, this kind of ironically enough made me think of Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, which had a lot of good ideas. You can question the execution, but to mathematically, scientifically prove the supernatural, this is not too far removed from that. And I'm having a hard time with the themes just because I can't myself really get the themes to gel, because I understand what he's trying to do here, but like I feel like it's a little more nebulous than maybe like even Carpenter was trying to do.
If I may, Chris, I want to build off what you said. And so oftentimes when technology is introduced in a situation of dealing with the unknown, it's about the dangers of science going to the unknown. I study computational linguistics.
That's why I thought you might enjoy this a bit more.
So I was actually having flashbacks of grad school while as they're populating all these lists of. I did a whole decryption model, which is putting a kind of a brute force thing where I'm actually outputting AAAB, so on and so forth. So like that. But going back to my original point is that oftentimes you want to deal with the unknown in that science develops. And Orientalism as a mystic force unknown in the West is an old trope that they adapt here. It's we have the Western technology meeting with Eastern mysticism to create the end of the world. Is that lazy racism?
It was the 50s.
I'm not here to decide on that, but that I think is the intent of here. That's why I said if you view anything more than just the surface layer, this thing's a house of cards built on fears of what can be done with computation. I don't know if it's. I don't know if in retrospect I can't give it credit because it's been many years since this. Was it effective at the time? Well, it's a famous story. Mm-hmm. It might have been. So I'm going to pass it along, but that's kind of my 2 cents.
All right, I'll hop in. Like, and maybe it goes back to what we just said, even about plot. For like, I've always felt this way. It's more of a thought experiment, like a neat little idea that's, like you said, Steve, like sort of like Clarke banged out in like a short length of a story and probably a short time span to write it. I mean, I don't know for sure, but that's what it feels like. So like, while that is a cool, neat idea as well as you said, Chris, I don't know. Similar to what you said, E, I don't know if that's enough for a 1. I'm probably leaning towards a soft 0, even though I still like it. Like, I don't think there is enough there. And I also agree that perhaps if he tried to go more into it, the House of Cards would have collapsed completely. So again, maybe it's by design, by default, etc., as we often say. But I think in this case, it warrants that angle, and that's how I'm probably approaching it at this point.
I would say for me, I don't think it is enough for a 1. And you're right. The further you look into it, the shakier the stilts are, turtles all the way down or whatever. I don't know if that applies there. Probably not. But,
Linguistics all the way down.
You think it's turtles all.
Yeah. It's only 9 billion turtles.
Turns out to be paper turtles
Finite
in the
number
bottom. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think that like it's a super strong premise and theme to begin with. And I think that the more you hack it apart, the worse it gets. So, I mean, I just don't think that there's a lot there. There's a lot of bones there to put the carcass onto, if you will. So I'm going to give it a 0 probably for...
Very shaky skeleton.
Yeah.
I really agree.
Where does this take place again? In Tibet?
I believe so. It's definitely...
And New York.
And the reason I'm saying is to Ian's point about Western
it's
science versus
location in a monastery. Like they for sure say that. I don't remember exactly offhand. Sorry, but
I think it is Tibet. They say that like getting into the Himalayas or something like that is difficult at this point or whatever.
Yeah.
The reason I only bringing this up as a point, I'm giving it a 0, by the way. I'm bringing this up as a point because Clarke did move to and retire and die in Sri Lanka, which is south of India. So I'm just talking because you had mentioned Western machines with Eastern Orient philosophy or spiritualism. I don't know. I just thought it was like this point of trivia that he lived in Sri Lanka for the latter half of his life.
Sure. I mean, I don't know. Like, was he living there though, Chris, when he wrote?
So it's not lazy racism. It's just racism.
Well, research.
Admiration?
That is trivia. Anyway, we're going to give it a 0s all, I believe. And
Yeah, I think so.
I think just not enough. Yeah, as we said. So.
And so Ian, why don't you tell us about the antagonists, if there is one or what it is?
There is because make the argument they are antagonized throughout this. The characters we're following are in a culture they're not comfortable in. They often say like I think they spend 3 months in running this program, and over time the vistas, they got their the honeymoon period over with of the beauty of the area, and now they're stuck in this monastery computing something they don't believe in the spiritualism, which turns out to be correct in this manner, but they're not afraid of the superstition being accurate. They're afraid of the repercussions
being accused of doing a bad job.
What happens when the superstition fails. So yeah, they are they have legitimate concerns with what they face throughout this. Whether that again a good antagonist, debatable, but I think that their antagonism exists, and also the unknown of what will come out of science, or what your intention for an application that you create in science will be used later on. So, sorry, I'm going to. One of the things is I work in computational linguistics, and whatever you're thinking about doing with like translation and communication, you also have cops creating profiles on mass shooters and doing government surveillance based on what you're creating. So you never know what the use of technology will become later on. Yeah, applications, absolutely. So that fear is founded completely. Granted, yeah, I'm not worried about Tibetan monks calculating God with my program, but you never know what someone's going to use. Yeah,
sure. Like who knows? It was, I believe the characters are Chuck and George or something, some very generic American kind of. Like so, I guess I'll mention it here. Like again, this was written sort of like the quote unquote golden age of sci-fi for all right. So it was like Clarke, Asimov, like Bradbury, like even Phil K. Dick. Like, and granted, I do have an affinity bias for that, but I do think like viewed through the lens like of the times, like yeah, it's sort of been like, what if technology is used to do this? Like right, and like to be fair, like a lot of the sci-fi at the time was doing that exact thing, and even to this day, that's what Chris, you might say, like that's what sci-fi does. It explores these kinds of ideas. But to answer the antagonist question, I do mostly agree with how you laid it out, E, that, yeah, they're antagonized. I always find it kind of funny, like, you're right, not necessarily by, like, that, like, whether or not they're going to, like, George and Chuck assume they're not, like, nothing will happen, but, like, when that happens, then they're going to bitch at us because they think we did a shitty job or, like, our computer didn't work or whatever. Like, it's so, like, Americana to me, like, well, fuck that, we're bouncing. so we don't get we don't get yelled at by our clients essentially. So I do think they do feel it. So I think it's enough there, like in almost the reverse case of themes, there is enough there on the antagonism front for me to give it like an all right, like a softer one, but still a 1 at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I don't think I have too much more to say about Antagonists. You guys pretty much covered it, but I can probably give it a 1. So
Yeah, it crosses the goal line.
Yeah, just gets there, right? Kind of, yeah.
Ian, was that a 1 for you too?
Sure.
Okay.
Why not?
I'm going to talk about protagonists, which I guess are Chuck and George, even though they don't show up until about a third or more of the way through this very short story. And they're kind of there. I mean, they feel like secondary characters to me, almost. Like there's no real character development with them. They just kind of say what they're already feeling and don't change and just kind of go through their day. So if it's them, I'm probably going to give it a 0.
No, I feel it. I mean, I would say it certainly is them. And you get like similar again to what we just said, the barest bones of like,
I never know this show. I never know with this show if somebody's going to change my mind on what I said about protagonists. So I always want to leave it.
I get you, sure, but I mostly agree though in this case at least that like you get like they've been doing this job for 20 years, and I think George is like, I've never I've never ducked out on a job, but this might be the case, the time to do it. But again, for different reasons than they think.
Yeah.
But there's like again the loosest of sketches for their characters, and I would say they're a la this whole entire story / premise being a thought experiment. They are just merely plot devices to convey that. They're not really like fleshed out characters. They're just there to like basically symbolize or like be emblematic of the Western mindset, I would say, right? So in that case, like I agree, probably like softer 0, but 0 maybe by design, but on our scale, the way we look at things, the narrative and the characters and so forth, I think that's where it lies. So
Yeah.
They're kind of like the American chorus as opposed to the Greek chorus. You've got
like
you've got representation of American exceptionalism. I agree with you. I mean, I actually considered them supporting characters. I didn't really find a real clear and protagonist in this. I mean, the third person
it's from their point of view, but like I'm just saying that isn't much.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as you said, they show up a third of the way into the story, and granted, it's not a long story. So, but yeah, there's not really a protagonist here.
Yep.
Yep.
All right. Scott, why don't you talk about supporting characters?
All right, so that's sort of like reverse. You know what? I actually do like I believe they call him Sam Hefe or something like that, like the head lama, like the leader of the monastery. And I think like this might flow into the next question or two, but I think it might be enough for me to give it a 1 because I think he actually is the most interesting and fleshed out character. Now, granted, we get him through George and Chuck's eyes, but I do think there's, like you said, Chris, it's just over the line for me because of that. Because again, it's a small cast. They don't talk to any of the other monks per se. They just talk to him, and even that only very briefly. But I do think he's like an enigmatic character, at least to them, us as an audience to an extent. And he turns out to be right. Like their mission literally like was correct, and they've accomplished it, and literally lights out for the universe. So I think at least I'm coming into it possibly giving it like a softer 1, but still a 1. But I'm not totally married to it, so I could be convinced. So with that, you guys,
Let's mention this here. How long was this name that they were calculating? Because you can write out all permutations of this alphabet within probably a couple of months by yourself.
well, they said something like it's
Up to 9 letters. It's up to 9
yeah,
letters.
it's 9 digits or 9 characters, right?
So this is factorial, whatever. I'm not that great at like that kind of math. But to me, if you have a monastery filled with monks, you could probably do that in 3 months.
No, they've been doing it for centuries. But see, that's the thing goes back to you pick out the details.
Every combination of 9 letters is a shitload of, it's like 9 billion.
Yeah, but how many could you do per day?
Dude, monks before the movable print, monks used to like spend days transcribing
I understand.
the Bible. I mean,
I'll take A's. You start on B's. You start on C's, Chris. You start on D's, Scott. Well, let's get this done in a couple months.
Well, it goes back to you pick out the details.
I don't think you have an idea in your head how many 9 billion is.
Yeah, it's feasible. This is not a centuries task. This is perhaps a couple of months. Is a short thing, but it's somewhere between a couple of months and a couple of centuries. So I'm going to say probably at worst a few years to write out 1 billion words that are H9 letters. I'm just saying it starts to fall apart. So I am not quite sure on the motivation of these llamas, because at its heart it doesn't necessarily make sense to me. That being said, I guess God is a petty fucker who just wants all his names written out, and then the Mark V, I guess, is just doing his job. But I don't know. I'm going to give it. I'm going to give it 0 for the same reason that we gave the Protagonists. One, they exist, but the more I look into it, the worse it gets.
I think the Mark V might be my favorite secondary character in this. But no, they have that whole conversation in the beginning between Dr. Wagner and the llama. And then the llama's the only one that actually exists throughout this whole story.
Yeah. So I'm giving it a 1 for basically him.
And he's fine, but
his premise doesn't make sense to me.
I don't know if it's enough for a 1.
It does go back to.
I don't know. What do you say?
It does go back to you going like, if you pick at the details, then like you can find a lot of holes, like a lot of inconsistencies. We'll say. Go ahead, Chris.
What do you think, Chris?
I was gonna say, I am kind of falling on a 0 to this, because I do like the llama, because he just doesn't seem to care. He's going to go about his work no matter how the Westerners are going to.
He's so confident that they're
but by the same token, he was there. There's really nobody in the story that I would consider a character. There's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of avatars for those ideas, and the success or failure of ideas, is dependent upon what you get out of it. But I don't really see any real characters or characterizations in the story. I mean, again, it's a very short story and there is not a lot of time. But then again, Roald Dahl, painted a pretty vibrant, vibrant picture.
Hey, Lawnmower Dad or whatever, like
Lawn Dad. Yeah, Lawn Dad. Yeah, what was it? 3 paragraphs? 8 paragraphs, something like that. My whole point is not to dig against the ideas, and I'm just saying that I don't really see any kind of characterization in anybody.
No, that's fair. Like, that might convince me. I don't know. Like,
I got to agree with that. I just don't think there's any movement on any of these characters.
That might be the final thing too.
Down a 0 for me.
Yeah, but seriously, as you said, Scott, Lawn Dad can do it, and it was.
I'm saying, like, it's possible to do it. Yeah. Now, I think you guys, like, at the end of the day, like, while I might like the character, like you said, there's not enough movement / growth to, like, in all good faith, give it a 1. So I'll switch to a 0.
All right. Zeros all around for that. Chris is going to bring you to dialogue.
Well, there's dialogue. Like I said, all right, dialogue, as I said, is always the easiest for me to get a 1. As long as it's natural, it's fine. And that you would never get any insight to any characters were it not for the few scraps of dialogue they're in here. So I think by default, I have to give it a 1. It may be maybe praise, damning with faint praise, or praising with faint damnation.
It's damning with faint praise. You seem to be confused about that saying, which you've invoked recently.
No, I did that, but I think the reason I'm switching around is because I kind of feel like what I'm doing is this, like,
I don't think it means what you think it means.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but what I'm saying is it functions, and if there's any kind of characterization, any kind of motivation, it is put through the dialogue. So I kind of have to give the dialogue a default 1.
So, Steve, can you write 10,000 words in a day?
Yeah.
Let's say there's 1 billion permutations of this. I don't know the actual math, but we agreed upon 1 billion for the thing. 20 people, 10,000 words a day, 20 people would be like 13 years.
Okay. I
So
thought
I'm
it was
saying
9.
that.
Was the
What?
intent. So 9 times that.
Yeah. But I think it's bigger than 20 people at the monastery, right?
I didn't really say. It was unclear. Like,
Anyway, it's not
exactly how many
15,000 years or whatever the hell they said.
Yeah. I did a little bit of again, this is flimsy math based on just assumptions, but I think I can put 10,000 words in there.
why did you
Anyway,
I mean, you got the skills to build a program.
I have a program that does
I
this.
know.
It takes me about a week to run. But what are we talking about? Sorry, I was doing
Dialogue.
Dialogue. What'd you think?
Yeah, it was okay. Yeah. I had trouble at times differentiating between who was speaking amongst the two characters, but overall, I'll give it 1.
I mean, there's not that many lines of dialogue again because it's
Actually, it's majority of
it's compressed,
dialogue.
condensed. Like they have a couple conversations, yeah, but maybe it's like 50-50. Actually, now I think about it, true. But I'm saying like I'm probably going to follow suit with you, Chris. Like it's fine. It was there. There was something like stilted about it, given the setup and the general premise and framework overall. So yeah, like default-ish softer 1, but still 1 for me at least.
Yeah, I think that dialogue was actually pretty decent in this. To be honest, I thought that it was one of the better parts of this story, and I actually enjoyed a lot of the conversations that they had for the most part. So I'm going to give it a 1 for dialogue.
All right.
I think that's 1s all around, right?
I think so, yeah.
And that's going to bring us to style with Ian.
So I when they mentioned Mark V, I was thinking of the Harvard Mark series. I again study computational linguistics.
Be more knowledgeable about that.
Also, I teach computer architecture, so I do a bit about the history of computers. So I think they actually did a fairly good job. I could picture the Mark V that they were discussing, and yeah, it was competently done science fiction on the detail level, even if I disagree with the ideas underlying that. But this is not about the underlying themes. This is about the execution. I think the execution was well done.
Yeah, I mean, Arthur C. Clarke is recognized as, like I said, one of the masters of that era of sci-fi. And while this might not be his best or greatest story, I think it still holds up, especially like maybe it's sort of like somewhat dented at this point. But when I first read it, when I was much younger, there's, if I recall, the final 2 lines actually, there's in parentheses, it says, he writes, there's a last time for everything. And then it's 1 by 1, the stars were slowly going out. So like, and just in general, it holds up. It's very readable. Like it's not trying to be too complex. Like it's straightforwardly giving you the events that we already talked out. I still think it holds up. And like I said, he's as a beloved and respected writer of the genre, and I still think that works and stands. So I'll give it probably a stronger one of the strongest ones here.
Yeah, I agree. I think for the reasons both of you just said, I think style is going to get a default 1. That's all I wanted to say, Steve. I'll go on.
No, you can keep going. I didn't mean to scare you off. But what I was going to say is I think that you're right. It is a competently done sci-fi story in terms of style. And wasn't there something from Player Piano that was like a Mark something computer?
I think so, but I don't remember it that well.
The ENIAC and all of that kind of.
Yeah.
It's from the same general era. Yeah, that's right.
I wonder if that's probably not. Probably have nothing to do with each other, but that just reminded me of that. Yeah, I thought it was pretty solid in terms of style. The 3-part structure was well done, all that. So cool. 1 for style.
Cool.
Not the craziest thing ever, but certainly not the worst. Nowhere near the worst.
I wonder if it was a punch card system.
I thought they did. I can't remember if they said it or not in the story.
I don't believe they did because I just read the story like an hour ago.
You read it fresher than everyone else, but I guess my final thing is like this is a case of literal style over substance, like pretty much so.
How many vacuum tubes they would have to go through?
Right?
And that's a big part of the job.
Nowadays, somebody could write an app for this.
Yeah.
You can get 9 billion names of God in 30 seconds.
In fact, I just wrote
Not even.
a program that does this while we're doing this podcast. No, I'm just kidding. But I could have. It's not that hard. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. But anyway, I think that's 1s all around for style, right? And then we're gonna go on to recommendation with me. There's better sci-fi short stories out there. There's just other stuff. Check out I don't know. I can't remember any of the sci-fi stories that we did now that I'm trying to think of them, but I think we did an Asimov one that you guys really liked that I
We sure
wasn't
did.
on that episode. And
We did a bunch of, or at least one or two Philip K. Dicks. We did some Heinlein.
Yeah. There was a Warren Ellis one in there somewhere too.
Well,
So yeah, there's better short fiction for sci-fi than this one. I'm sure, Clarke himself did better.
yeah, I mean, it's all right. Yeah.
For fiction for sci-fi.
So doesn't mean you're giving it a 0, like you're not quite recommending it, you're saying?
No, I'm not going to recommend it. I'm going to give it a 0. You could spend your time better, I think.
I mean, like, I am because it technically was my pick. Like, yes, certainly, like, it's no Childhood's End, which is probably the most famous thing that Clarke is known for, right? It's not that, sure. But since it is short enough, I think it's, it's kind of more of a conversation starter, almost as proven out by our discussion here. Like, it's a good thought experiment little story, like, a la Bradbury as well. I mentioned Steve, like, we did a couple of his for sure, which, like, one or two of them was, like, a similar-ish thing, at least to me, to this one. So, like, yeah, it doesn't take up much of your time. Like, I still would probably just over the line recommend it more than I wouldn't, even though I agree that, like, I would say that it is nowhere near his best work or even of the era, but it's, like, sort of inoffensive-ish enough, and again, goes by quick. You can get through it 20 minutes maybe or so, and, like, maybe it might have a spark or so for you, like, it's kind of a cool idea, and you'll probably forget about it in, like, a couple days later, but at the time I think it's worth it. So I will give it a soft-ish but still a recommendation.
If you're a Clarke completionist, this is something you have to read.
You must read it.
Yes,
I mean,
but that's the thing is that's the only. Even though, yeah, it's very short. You're right, Steve-O, when you mentioned that it took me 20 minutes to read this, and there are things I could have been doing to use my time more wisely. I didn't hate on this. But I think it's a relic of its time, and it's the only interesting thing is the historical context of science fiction, and for that, I think there are other exampple from this time that for a purpose such as historical analysis. So that's gonna be 0 for me.
I'm coming right between you and Scott. I am going to recommend it actually because you're not going to find this unless you're looking for it. When I was working at the library, when I read this, when I was reading a lot of Clarke and a lot of stuff, it was something I came across. It was something that I sought out. It was something that I read. And obviously, I didn't remember it. It wasn't like the Roald Dahl, where as soon as I saw the line, the title, I was like, "Oh, maybe this was something from 3rd grade." No, it's a very short read, even for somebody like me. It didn't take long at all. It's a nice little lark. It's kind of like, it's like an intermezzo thing. It's like that little thing of sorbet, somebody gives you an amuse-bouche, If somebody hands you a Thai chili cuttlefish that they bought at the store, sure, why not? Give it a shot.
Chris, I once made the comment that you should never do reviews when you're hungry, because you're going to start just.
Oh no! I just ate. I'm just trying to think of like, this isn't anything that I'm going to go say, "Oh my God, you've got to read this." But as you said, Ian, I don't even think you'd have to be a Clarke completionist. I mean, I just think that when you start exploring sci-fi, it's gonna. If you come across it, yeah, go ahead, read it. But again, this is a niche. This is a niche within a niche. So, taking it for that.
Okay.
Fair enough.
So
What do we got?
that is going to be it for our reviews.
Wait, do we have a score?
Anyone has? Yes, we do. Hold on. Unless anyone else has anything to say, I'm going to go over the scores in just a moment.
I was about to ask you, what are the 9 billion scores that we've given it?
So Scott, you and Chris have both given it a 6, and Ian and I have both given it a 5, which means that this is a 5.5 short story.
I think it's exactly that.
5.5 billion short story scores for this. So yeah, about a 5.5. It's fine, not great. There's the other things you could be doing.
Like
in me and Ian's respect. In our respect, we think that we can do better than this one, and that's kind of the only thing that we disagreed on. None of us gave it credit for themes. None of us gave it credit for protagonist or supporting, and all of us took a point out for plot. So that's it. 5.5, 9 billion names. I've been your host, Steve Ramosi, joined tonight by Christopher Morgan.
Good night.
Jonathan Ian Manzer.
I am legitimately going to build this program out of curiosity, just because I think it'd be a fitting end to 2020.
If you cause the end of the universe with your program, I would salute that.
Here's what you got to do. Take a timer of how long it takes you to write out 9 letters, and then build that idle into every single time it does a calculation. See how long it takes. And
Right on.
At Thurlow.
And I am going to shut off the stars myself. Thank you so much for joining us. We shall see you next time. Cheers.
Have a good night.
Editing and engineering by Stephen Hermosi. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.